Hello, this is Stan Lubeck. When leaders make progress, everyone benefits. Welcome to Coaching Pit Stop, where I help leaders take the next step in leadership skills, discipline, and strategic thinking. Today I want to talk about a character issue. We live in a day where courage is calling. The only question becomes, how will you and I respond? Will you speak up or will you shrink back? People are protesting, university presidents are cowering.
You got into Harvard Law?
What, like it's hard?
People are dying, terrorists are trying to intimidate and control the narrative of nations. As for me, I stand with Israel. I stand with the righteous against genocide, racism, anti-Semitism. The stakes are high in the Middle East, and we need to make sure that we are on the right side of history at this critical time. After World War II, we said, never again. Never again will we allow anti-Semitism and genocide to rear its ugly head. But here we are again, facing a potential Holocaust involving another genocide. Steven Spielberg established the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum after producing the movie Schindler's List. He wanted to make sure that no one forgot, but sadly, humans by nature tend to forget. The hatred and violence against Jews today is incredible. However, God has a plan for the Jews, and this conflict in the Middle East is nothing new. It's been going on for centuries. All we need to do is read the Bible. All anti-Semitism is abhorrent, unacceptable, no matter what the liberal intelligentsia thinks. The cowardice of the presidents of Harvard University and other left-wing Ivy League schools is shameful. They stand for nothing. I learned as a teenager, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So sad to see these higher education presidents falling and failing our young people today. Each one of us need to fearlessly stand for what we believe. I'm unashamed to say that I stand against the terrorist group Hamas and all the moral and social atrocities that we've been seeing on the news. They must be removed. I'm reminded of the famous quote by Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists, but I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I'm not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Ryan Holiday's book, Courage is Calling, reminds me of our debt to those who sacrificially and shamelessly paid the price for standing against evil racism, anti-Semitism, and Nazism back in the day. Few paid a higher price than Francis Charles de Gaulle. De Gaulle was tried in absentia by the Vichy regime and sentenced to death. In the last war, he had been wounded multiple times, including by bayonet. He had been a prisoner of war, and he had attempted to escape relentlessly, fearlessly, at grave risk. Imagine the courage of his wife, too, commandeering a spot on a boat, getting 3 young children, including one with Down syndrome, safely to London as enemies swarmed to find her. In the decades to come, de Gaulle and his wife were the victims of 30 serious assassination attempts. After one, their car riddled with machine gun fire, the windows shattered, all the tires blown out, Yvonne de Gaulle emerged unscathed and calmly inquired about the groceries she'd recently put in the trunk. This was a family that mastered fear, transcended it even. Well, consider the courage of Theodore Roosevelt as he faced ugly racism in his day. Ryan Holiday writes, Theodore Roosevelt hesitated when he invited a black man, Booker T. Washington, to the White House for dinner in 1901. It was the first time in American history that a black man had ever dined as a sitting president's guest. He hesitated because he was scared what his southern relatives might think, for fear of what the newspapers would say, fear that racist voters would abandon him, that he would lose support in the South, that it could cost him the election. A sitting president, the man who led the Rough Riders on a suicidal charge, who hunted bears, who had conquered a crippling childhood illness, who had beaten depression and grief and a million other obstacles, was scared of what people might think. Theodore Roosevelt said, the very fact that I felt a moment's qualm on inviting him because of his color made me ashamed of myself, Roosevelt said in a letter to a civil rights advisor, and made me hasten to send the invitation. John F. Kennedy shined in his support of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in one of his darkest hours. On October 19, 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested for trying to eat at a restaurant inside Rich's department store in Atlanta. With their enemy in custody, Southern authorities seized the opportunity to try and crush King while they had a chance. Holding him on other charges, they denied bail, sent him to the state prison in Reidsville, where he was to be sentenced to 4 years on a chain gang. There was real worry that King might be beaten or lynched, and Coretta Scott King, very pregnant with their third child, called both the Nixon and Kennedy campaigns, who in one of the tightest elections in American history both desperately needed the black vote. Nixon, as it happens, was not only friends with King, but had personally overseen the Eisenhower administration's civil rights efforts. His advisors urged him to act, but Nixon hesitated, weighing the same considerations that had flashed in the mind of Theodore Roosevelt a half-century before. He didn't want to lose the South. He didn't want to wade into the middle of the controversy. He was worried that it would seem grandstanding, so he betrayed King in the moment and left the door open for Kennedy to call both the governor of Georgia as well as Coretta, whom he rang directly from an airport to console and reassure. Meanwhile, his brother Robert Kennedy called the judge in Alabama and pressured him into releasing King. King immediately made it known who had been there for him when he needed it, even though he had planned to vote for Nixon. I'd known Nixon longer, he recalled, and he would call me frequently about things, getting and seeking my advice. And yet when this moment came, it was like he had never heard of me. So this is why I really considered him a moral coward, and one who was really unwilling to take a courageous step and take a risk. Let me ask you, are you willing to take a courageous step and risk something by supporting those being unjustly persecuted and abused? Is there someone you need to contact today as Kennedy contacted Coretta Scott King? Are you known for being loyal and having others' backs, or do you give in to peer pressure? I once pastored a church where the elders started meeting secretly. I'm not sure if that's even legal, but they started meeting secretly to discuss the gossip that they had heard by the rabble-rousers in the church. There's always a few. They didn't accuse me of sin, but they had, quote, concerns, unquote, because they chose to believe the accusations of the anonymous gossipers. It was one of the saddest and loneliest days in my entire ministry. Not one of them came to me on a personal basis. So I'm comforted knowing that Jesus faced horrendous gossip in his day, and even his close friend Peter failed to have his back, 3 times to be exact. Jesus forgave him and restored him, so I strive to do the same. So as God says in Hebrews 10:38, "But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him." So don't shrink back. When God is calling you to a courageous step, step forward, even if it's not popular, even if others around you are caving. God always has a next step when courage is calling to walk by faith. I don't want to be counted among the cowardly who fail to speak up against evil. I'm reminded of what Revelation has to say. In Revelation 21:8, it says, "But as for the cowardly," notice this, "as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire." So I don't want to be in that crowd. So don't be afraid. Do you know what the most repeated phrase in the Bible is? It's "do not be afraid." So you might not march in a protest or be in the evening news, but you can show your courage in your sphere of influence by speaking up when others are shrinking back in fear. So let me encourage you to be ready when courage is calling your name. God's best to you. Bye for now.